Actually, I'm late because I expected you, the gods of cybernetic, to click and ring and something. And I suddenly realized I should move myself instead.
Well, we're all here. We all made it.
Yeah, you're beautiful. We all look like chicken perched on a line of wood.
Right.
So, Mr. Bromm,
Hayley is going to start recording. Is that right, Hayley?
Yes, this is recording now.
yeah, I hear Hayley, but I hear Hal very badly.
Well, I'm sorry. I have it as loud as it will go.
Yeah, you sound like your voice is with cotton.
Okay.
You have cotton in your mouth?
Carol, can you give a test to Lucio?
I hear you very, very badly, really.
Hi, Lucio. I was just saying to Hayley that I think it's very funny that we're meeting on Zoom when we live only 45 minutes from each other.
Yeah, I know. Well, I sometimes talk by Zoom or by WhatsApp with people who are 2 doors away.
Well, I text the woman who lives in my house on the other side, in the other unit. We're texting all day long. So I guess this is the new, the way of being.
Well, now the alienation of modern society is institutionalized.
But I'm not sure it's alienation because we're in constant contact where we might not have been before.
So maybe we are contacting even more than before.
Yeah. But it's nice to see.
Sure, everything has changed.
I was thinking before we came on that we should talk about our connection to each other.
Huh.
Because I remember the moment that I met Lucio. I could create the whole scene. I don't know if Lucio remembers it, but I remember it.
Oh, let's hear that.
It was in Jerry's restaurant in Soho, probably around 1980. And he was having lunch with the Vogels, Herb and Dorothy Vogel, who I also knew fairly well. And they said, you should meet Lucio. So I did. And it's been all those years we've been friends.
Yeah, I remember it minute by minute. I was having lunch and suddenly Herbie said, hey, with his voice, his high voice, hey, there is Carol, let's go meet her.
So that began our friendship, yeah.
Yeah, a dialogue that has long gone forever, huh?
Yeah. And I was also thinking that of all the people I know, you are probably surviving best in this situation. I feel like you just generate no matter what. And also you have the advantage of living with another artist, which I think is really pretty helpful. But I feel like Lucio is going to generate and figure out a way to work in this situation.
Well, when I was 6 years old, bombs were falling on Milan. And during the night, my mother put my brother and me in a car with dimmed lights, and we left going parallel to the depot of the tramways, which was on fire with 5-story high flames.
Wow.
And we went to the countryside to some friend's house. And I lost all my toys, everything I had. And I mean, the house was not bombed, but I never saw them again because we were refugees out. And from there, eventually, we went to Switzerland. So I learned that I have to generate the creative moment, play, and whatever happens in any situation.
Right.
And I became very independent. I think I attribute that to my instinct to be able to do something anywhere and just be able to also laugh about it, even in tragic moments.
Well, I thought about how we present ourselves to other artists. And this has not been an easy time for me. And I would like to share that because I think a lot of, I see on Facebook, people are cleaning their houses and doing new work and making food and all this stuff. it's been a struggle for me, and I want to share that because I think it may be a struggle for a lot of people, and they feel guilty about it. They feel there's something wrong with them. They're not able to generate. And I would like to say to them, it's not your fault. The world is topsy-turvy. We have to adjust to it at every moment, every day. There's something different. And so I think just keeping your psychological equilibrium and not being brought down by it is the first goal we can have.
Why would they feel guilty?
Hmm?
Why would they feel guilty?
Because
I think that there's like this constant pressure to kind of be productive right now. That is like really prevalent on social media. I think
Pressure to what?
you're probably
Pressure
seeing.
to, I'm sorry, I was cut out. Pressure to,
Productive.
to be
To be
productive.
pressure to.
Pressure to
The word was cut out because a message came in my computer. Hayley,
pressure
she said pressure
to be productive. Not only that, that is the era that we just left. The
Right.
era that we just left was all about producing. And
Yeah.
from when I was a child, my mother was always talking about what did I accomplish? And I hear that
Right.
word shudder because because it stayed with me. But I think that we have gone from a time when producing is not as important as who we are in this moment, what we're contributing in this moment, how we're taking care of ourselves in this moment. And we can't plan. The time of planning is over. It's
Yeah. I totally agree with you. Producing is very much the result of 150 years or maybe 200 years of high capitalism. But I keep reminding everybody when they are all panicked about the coronavirus and everything. And I keep telling them that in the arts, people have totally forgotten about the reality of the world their art is facing since ever. And I mean, we have been going to Miami, Basel, and I've never been, but to be fancy and make everything like fun and whatever. But no artist seems to, not no artist, but very many artists seem to forget completely that while all this is going on, there are 800 million people who are dying of hunger in the world and who have all kinds of epidemics of different kinds because of their poverty and the lack of education and the lack of resources. So it's very important to me, two things. One is to remind myself that I am working in parallel to these tragedies happening. And then in parallel also to great, wonderful discoveries and creativities. But then it's very important, I should not feel guilty about being able to have the leisure to trace a red watercolor square in front of a leaf. And I should be able to do it in the name of the freedom of existence, which is the one, it's something very important, I don't know why, to face all the tragedies of the world. So the two things, one's to know that there are the tragedies of the world, and the other one not to censor in the name of some bourgeois misplaced guilt, the fact that I should be able to do a non-utilitarian, beautiful sign on a piece of paper. Those are the things that COVID has brought to me in my discussions with my friends, because people seem to forget what the world is. And in our leisurely art world, we have forgotten it completely.
well, now it's overwhelming us. I mean, today I read something that I didn't see in the news, that 100 people in Chicago were shot over the weekend and 14 died.
Now,
Yes.
Wow.
And Chicago is where I'm from, so I feel a certain, even more connection to it. But I read something like that, and the fact that it didn't hit the mainstream news, that this is local news, I have to adjust to that in some way. I hear something like that every day that is shocking. And so I have to figure out where I am in the world, and I find it disorienting. And so I really have to be myself in the present and bring myself back to the present and find whatever I can in the moment. But I find it very challenging.
Yeah, well,
Do you think that
it,
there, oh, apologies. Do you think that there are any kind of like new horizons, like because of the coronavirus that the art world now has that it didn't have before? Like any kind of possible potential futures?
potential, potential
Potential futures for the art world. Do you think that
futures.
there are any big differences that can be made?
Well, you know, it's only been a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remember, it hasn't even been months, it's been weeks that all of this adjustment is taken place. I mean, it's really just been a matter of weeks. Our whole world has changed. Even the way it looks has changed because everybody's wearing a mask. So I think it's very hard to predict, but I think that we are getting down to a point where real values become very important and the superficial values will fall away. The silly things, the kind of Richard Princey jokes, excuse me if you love Richard Prince, but these kind of inside in art world little tricks, I think.
You mean things
Ah,
like
that's
gold
hopeful.
toilets, Carol?
I'm sorry?
Things like gold toilets?
Yeah, yes, because I think when someone in that situation who is benefiting from that situation comments on the situation, it's less meaningful. In other words, the whole idea, I was writing I just wrote a book. And I think part of it for me that's happening now is that it's like after you have a big one-person exhibition and it's over and you feel empty and you don't know what the next thing is. So I'm there. I wrote a book about Banksy. It's now into the publisher. It was a long project and it kind of got cut off. You know, I mean, it's done. So where am I creatively? I just had a group show in New York that opened on March 8th. So that went, But anyway, when I was writing about Banksy, I wrote about the Guerrilla Girls as part of this whole political art and talked about how the Guerrilla Girls, now they're showing in museums. Now they're showing in the very institutions that they were critiquing.
Yeah.
I'm like, so how meaningful is that? They're benefiting from it and they've narrowed their audience to people who, I wouldn't say are with them, but it makes them feel good to agree with them. So I have less, I really feel like the institutions and the artists have to separate themselves and look at their purposes and see if they actually come together.
That's your wish. But our society, since maybe 100 years or more, is such that the artists and other people of thought try to hit the powers with a fist. And the powers have been doing this now for a long time. What they do is they look at the fist, take it with a hand, and say, beautiful fist, how much does it cost? So you're expressing a future as a desire, but the greed and the distortions of the monetary values seem to be resilient. They transform themselves like a virus that keeps mutating. After 9/11, everyone thought New York would become compassionate and friendly. Instead, greed and competition became rampant. When I meet an artist, an old friend in New York in the street, I ask sometimes what they're doing. And they don't tell me whether they're painting or doing videos or dance or whatever. They tell me who wrote about them and how much they sold for. I mean, you, Carol and Hal and Hayley, you all know that. It's seems that it seems that a kind of loss of orientation makes people hang on to the last draft, which is money and greed. And of course, I would love to art to be re-arted, but it is an eternal uphill fight. There's no way out. The future that Hayley asks about is like in the art world. I always tell people, the future is after it's happened, because one never knows what happens. It's whimsical, and your creative input, your desire to breathe, and to be able to do something that can maybe share with someone else, that's the most valuable thing. But we don't know what the future will be. Who knows?
I see it as like,
Is that you?
it's me, and I put myself on airplane mode, so I think I just have to turn
It's a
the
strong
whole,
whistle.
yeah.
Carol was raising a very good point about what I would call too much input. And that was recently corroborated by psychologists in an article in the New York Times. And the overall description of what we were all going through in the early days of COVID was information overload. There was so much coming in that we had to digest and absorb and try to put our head around. The virus, which was itself unknown and frightening, the people being suddenly hospitalized, people dying, and then we've had more recently the overlay of the increasing understanding of how the government itself has failed its citizens to protect them or to guide any kind of intelligent response to the virus. And then we've had, at the same moment, this extraordinary outpouring of grief and anger over the endless murder of Black people that finally came to a head with George Floyd. And so this incredible, what would we call it, a kind of dynamic of horror that has engulfed everyone, I think has, for many people, resulted in shell shock. And if you can keep, as Carol was saying, and Lucio, if you can keep any sense of equilibrium in the midst of it all, you're doing pretty good. But a lot of people are not doing well at all. And so the crisis of anyone who's creative is, how do we recognize this? How do we honor this? How do we talk about people who are dead, people who are ill, people who were ill, who've recovered, but they haven't recovered well? And then couple that with the ongoing fear that any of us could become ill at any time. And now with the virus escalating again, we have Dr. Fauci saying, this isn't a second wave, we're still in the first wave. And the first wave isn't done yet. And yet many parts of the country and the world are reopening. So there's all this to process. And I think one question becomes, for both of you as artists, how are you processing it? And I thought Lucio's comment about, I have to have the right and the ability to take a piece of paper and make a red square and a green leaf if that moment enters my mind. I have to have that freedom. And Carol, your observation about finishing the book and then there's a big void, I think that's a very interesting sensation. When did the book finish?
The two things happened at once, unfortunately. If like, I have a friend who's writing a screenplay, and he's in the middle of writing a screenplay, and he's completely obsessed with it. And that's just taken him through this time because he's in the middle of this obsession. If this had happened in the middle of my obsession, I could have made it work for me.
In writing about Banksy.
Writing about Banksy, because the politics and everything would play into it.
Yes.
But unfortunately, that's over. And I'm just ready to figure out what my next thing is going to be when this happens. So for me, it was kind of a double whammy. But I want to speak to what Lucio was talking about with the economics. We as artists were always responding to the economics. I think the economics of this world are going to change enormously, and the values are changing enormously. I try and envision for my little town that I live in the Berkshires, how the police could be different, how they could not, they're really predators. They're really, even in our little town, looking to make sure we're not speeding so they can give us a ticket, or if our taillight is out so they can stop us. What if the whole thing were completely changed and they're like, sir, your taillight is out. I know the closest place you can go to get it fixed. You know, this kind of thing. If we could be helping each other instead of this whole, not just the police, but all of capitalism being predatory. I think that this, I'm hoping and praying that this will change.
Well, we keep, I think it's an uphill fight and we'll keep fighting. I'm less optimistic than you are, but we all share this hope. There is a kind of testimony that our artists present, which is persisting in doing art, which has no utilitarian purposes, with no qualms about doing art that has propaganda or utilitarian purposes also. I mean, if we want to make a poster for a cause we believe in, it's very legitimate to do it. But we have to also understand that that legitimacy applies to people we disagree very much with. And it's a conflict between good and evil, which is kind of eternal. Racism is everywhere. The pogroms in East Africa against the Indians, and in Southeast Asia, they're against the Chinese. And the Chinese have pogroms against the Muslims. And the racism is terrible. It's an eternal fight. But what I am really keen on keeping in my mind is that, which I said before, I'm sorry to repeat myself, the legitimacy and almost necessity of the testimony of making art just without application and just as a possibility of sharing, even if only one person should see it. It's very crucial. And indeed, the proof of the value of this is that when dictators take power, that's what they try to cut immediately. Art that is completely innocent and does not try to subvert anything. Have you ever seen the film on Władysław Straczynski by Agnes Varda? Not Agnes Varda, by Wajda. Those Polish names, Zbigniew Wajda, whatever. Anyhow, Straczynski was a very successful pupil of Malevich, and he was teaching in the academy in Poland and had made a suprematist room that was received and visited by everybody. And then Stalinism came and they persecuted him until they were able to starve him to death. And this film about him by Wajda shows this artist who, regardless of everything, regardless of whatever happens to him, keeps painting his little paintings. And thank God there was the curator of the museum who secretly put them in the cellars of the museum so the police would not know. His students sometimes lost their lives because they were typing his memoirs and his ideas. And to me, that became so much the epitome. Now we had an epidemic of consumerism, and this has brought about this epidemic of disease. They say this disease is very much due also to the ecological disaster that we have brought about. And so we don't have Stalin killing us and cutting our neck. We don't have a Pope that hangs us if we don't do what he says and whatever. But there is a kind of very rigid culture we are facing.
But that's only because we're white, Lucio. There are people who are killed just because they go out in the street too late at
I
night.
know, I know. And
Oh,
artists also,
Holland, but
artists were ignored because they don't belong to the race. That's right. You know.
right. But I see this very much as like the 80s when the group of artists downtown decided to revolt against 57th Street and all the tropes that were part of the art world and the way art looked on 57th Street. This is ironic for me because I was showing on 57th Street at the time, but my friends were downtown and they just made up their own art. They just made it up. It didn't have anything to do with what was being shown at the time. They made it up. And I think that's what's going to happen now.
And some of them, though, were picked by the market and others were left out. That's what normally happens. The little groups with idealism, then comes Big Brother and picks one person, one puppet, and the puppet starts agitating and begins to be complacent and allows him or herself to be manipulated, and the others are left out in their purity. It's very important to support the absolute and total intensity of the artist. And it's not only the artist, also the people with the artist. The artist never alone. The art is never made by one person only. There are always 4, 5, 6 people around that. Call them dealers, call them friends, husbands, wives, whatever. But the art never is born in total isolation. It's very important. This making keeps in very crucial. It's a fence because we'll never win. I'm less hopeful than you are. I think we will never win. I'm sorry, Hayley, to put a damper on your youthful enthusiasm, but I think it's an eternal fight. In the 50s, when I was a teenager, we were all involved in Italy and Europe, like in Italy and France, we were involved in moderately reformist leftist politics. And I remember making an ideal of Ghana. Ghana was our slogan. Here was the decolonization of Africa. Here was the great opportunity of renovation and getting rid of neo-capitalism. We were already talking about neo-capitalism and everything. It ended up that Ghana ended up in the hands of a dictator who was completely sold to the European interests. And then it became better later on. But I really believe it's an eternal fight.
So you believe in capitalism winning out no matter what?
Well, I don't know what I believe because I'm very ignorant in economics, but I had the feeling that a guy who was part of the Bloomsbury group called John Maynard Keynes had the best intuitions for this in post-industrial world. And it's near capitalism. It's not extreme radical socialism, communism, fascism. And so far, it's his theories that saved the world in 1929. It's his theories that saved the world in 1998. When was it that Obama started a New Deal? 2008, when I was recently, yeah.
2008.
It's the Keynes theories that of balance between as much as one can, fostering and encouraging and also controlling the economic powers and also distribute for as fair as possible distribution to the people in need, to enhance their possibilities. All the other extremes, unfortunately, eat their own tail, and also in art, big stances end up becoming commodities that self-destroy. Carol, you were talking about Richard Prince, whom I am not a fan of. And I find it among the many competent young artists that dominate us, okay? Christopher Wool is a great friend also, and whatever. Total mystery for me. But anyhow, he had a social agenda. He thought he was denouncing capitalism. And look what happened, So I'm sorry for my pessimism. I stand for an eternal fight of resistance.
But
One of the
then
things we could talk about is the article this in the last few days in the New York Times about Black artists and Black art dealers saying the art world is an exclusive white man's club, that the Art Dealers Association of America doesn't have any
Yeah, yeah, I read it.
galleries in it,
I read that, yeah.
so on and so forth. And I wonder, Carol, if you had read that article.
I haven't read the article, but when we live in the white world, we take it for granted that that's the way it is.
You know what frightens me very much here is the commodification of justice. That is, suddenly there's been a movement to try to enhance and support whatever minority in its dealing with art and creativity and its distribution. But the great danger I see looming is the Bloomingdaling of all this. Bloomingdale's has a year of Russia after Russia opened, then it had a year of Brazil when suddenly Brazil artists or commodities were being discovered, and then they get consumed and tossed away for the next one. So I'm terrified of now the good liberals opening the door that they did not realize they themselves were closing against the black community and other communities that are disenfranchised, and making it a new commodity. This is the general way all over the world is commodify everything. It's terrible. Here is an injustice. Let's repair it. And how do we repair it? By commodifying it.
But I think we're beyond commodifying at this point, because we're going into an era when we can't predict what value is. We can't predict what those commodities are. We're going into a situation where, I mean, this could be a huge depression. And so maybe people won't be buying. Maybe art has to come from the grassroots, come from the people. I think we're at a time where we are seeing the, hopefully, death of the patriarchy. We are seeing movements come up that have no leader. They have no head. Like, it started with Occupy Wall Street. There was no one leading Occupy Wall Street. There is no one leading the Black Lives Movement. This is huge. This is a huge.
The salaries of CEOs after the Wall Street movement, the salaries of the CEOs all over the world doubled. You know, I was once, as things happen, I don't know why they happen to me sometimes, I found myself in the first group show of New York artists in Moscow after the thaw. It was still, either there was still Gorbachev or it was Yeltsin was about to come about. I think it was still Gorbachev. We were invited by the Artist Union in Moscow, and they invited us to all the studios of the artists whom the Artist Union had been supporting, but always discriminating against. And now here come the Americans, the thaw was happening. They did not bring us to the social realist studios, but all those other people were poor people, but had been surviving barely by doing maybe a couple of other jobs and doing maybe some abstract work, which was at the time not fashionable. And I remember these people telling us, and just the month before we arrived as a group of artists for a group show in New York, here we were, and just a month before, Sotheby's had an auction of Russian art. And some of those Russian arts were the guys who then got to be known in America, Bulgakov and Ilya and Bulakov, whatever. And anyhow, some of the artists we visited, some were pretty interesting artists. They were pushing the edges of art very far in actions that were done by them in some fields for only 5 friends, by doing things that were very, very private but meaningful. And this artist, I remember, told us, but we don't understand what's happening. Art is made to be given to friends. Art is not made to be sold for high prices. And then the humorous part is, one of them was Monastyrsky, who did some very interesting actions outside in the fields. It was like Tarkovsky films done almost surreptitiously with no one knowing it. Monastirsky was the one who told me, we don't understand what this is about art being made for the market. Art is made to give friends and that's it. Monastirsky, I heard, after 4 years, married a rich German woman and now is having a big market situation in Berlin.
Well, I think that we see things in very different ways. I really feel like you're looking at history as something that is going to tell us what the future is. And I see us at a point that is a total break from the past.
I'm doing everything in my power to be with you, everything in my power. Not only, I would suggest in my total modesty, excuse my conceit, that it's 40 years I'm doing that. But I'm totally with you, totally.
I mean, we have never seen this kind of world uprising with that's completely spontaneous, with no leader, no Martin Luther King, no Gandhi, no nothing. This is coming from, this is just thousands of people millions of people who share the same values. And the reason this can happen is because of the internet. They can find each other through the internet. They can organize through the internet. We have never had this before. So Occupy Wall Street came from the internet.
But the Arab Spring also, the Arab Spring was all through the internet.
Arab Spring is what I was trying to think of.
Brought all the dictators back.
LGBT.
Hal, unfortunately, I really don't hear you. At least speak slowly because I cannot.
Yeah, I have a little broken up.
I said, what about the LGBT movement?
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. I know we could talk for a long time, but before we run out of time, I want to do a little bit of recognition for this exhibition, which was meant to open on April 1st. Carol, you had a show that was opening in March. And among other great people in color is Lucio Pozzi, and also an artist who very much is working on the subject of LBGT, what should we call it?
Rights?
What?
Rights and recognition.
Rights and recognition, thank you, Hayley. Kyle Meyer, whose work focuses on Middle Eastern men who, simply because of the fact that they are interested in same-sex relationships, are likely to be murdered and ostracized without any question. And recently we heard about a young woman who was, I believe, 12 or 14, who was beheaded by her father in the Middle East because he dishonored the family by, she was going to run off with a man who was older than her, and so he chopped off her head. You just can't imagine these horrors. But Hayley, do you want to share anything about your take on the uprisings, as Carol has said, that have come up without any leadership?
Yes, I want to say, I believe Kyle Meyer's work is on Swaziland, African men. But yes, I think that it is very kind of unique to think about all of these movements that are originating, where, you know, we have the internet, which is something where all of these connections are kind of possible. And I think that it's been pretty incredible for the LGBTQ community, to kind of have information available, where a lot of people, I know that specifically Kyle Meyer grew up in, I believe, rural Ohio, where just not that much information was accessible on, you know, identities and what you connect with. And I think that it is kind of this incredible point of connection where you're able to find all of these opinions. I will say that I think that it can be bad where you can only be surrounded by your own opinions, because that is kind of, you're building the internet around your own beliefs and values. And I think that you can get kind of very tied into one side of things if you're only listening to yes men, I guess. But yeah, and I think that it's, oh,
But
sorry,
you're
go ahead.
agreeing with Carol that the internet has made all of this possible.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
You're agreeing with Carol that the internet has made all of this possible.
I think that a lot more opportunities have been available. I definitely agree with Carol that a lot more opportunities have been available to connect through the internet.
Let us hope you're right. I mean, let us hope it also has an effect,
Mm-hmm.
because there are forces who use the same instruments to control and to dominate. One must remember activism is not only on the part of causes that we agree with. There's lots of activism exactly on the opposite field. And I've done one thing recently. I've sent $5 to the Trump campaign, and I saw I receive 10 messages a day with all the slogans that they use and all the arguments they use. And you should do it too, because you can't believe the ignorance, the lying, and the extremity to which these people go under the guise of clarity. They seem very logical, they seem very clear. You can't imagine what they are. And they are activists. They're as activists as the people that we stand for. And the world is split all over. In India, the same thing has happened. People of the ultra-right are as strong as the people on the ultra-left. So I still believe that I will give my life to go on with Carol's idea, but it is an eternal fight.
I just want to say for this difference, the ultra-right is invested in preserving the old values.
Yes.
That's what they're into, the old values. They are fighting for the old values. And so that's what gives me optimism, is that this is a fight between the old and the new values. And I am going to look forward to seeing the new values prevailing.
Yeah, yeah.
If you look at the age group that we're talking about, of the Trump supporters and the people out in the streets, they, look at the people who went to his rally. They are old. They're on their way out.
You're
and
sure?
A whole new group. I'm so
You're
excited
sure?
to see that.
You're sure they're all old? Are you sure they're all old?
Yes, the people who sabotaged his event are.
Oh, that was brilliant. That was so brilliant.
But they were kids.
I know, that was fantastic.
Not
But the
even,
idea came from a lady who sent on the internet the message.
this is
But,
so.
what do you say? Do you remember Algeria? Algeria, when I was in Italy, then I came to New York also. We were supporting the Algeria movement for liberation from France dominance. And then the people who fought for the liberation of Algeria took power. And after a few decades, established a power they felt sure enough to guarantee more democracy. So they called for an election, and the election was won by the party that wanted to force women out of schools again, force women to wear veils, take away all the liberties and all the liberal free thoughts. And so this government made a coup d'etat and kept power. But it is an illegitimate government in Algeria now. It's a dictatorship, even after the spring. So when Voltaire said, I disagree with you, but I want you to be able to say what you say, and I will give my life to make it possible for you to say it. Now, if that person says to Voltaire, thank you for the freedom, I just want to put you in jail, what do? So with this liberation now here, I hope to God, I'll fight with you for everything that you stand for. But I hope to God it does not get manipulated from inside or from outside into again a domination over people, so that some of their freedoms are reduced even after some victories. And that's the fight should already start now in being terribly alert about where dogma is ready to take power, where profiteering is ready to take power, manipulations, because it's very sneaky the way the control powers sneak into whatever situation. Like, it's very funny. That's human.
See that with the looting, which was
Okay.
organized.
Sorry?
You could see that with the looting that was organized,
Uh-huh.
that happened the same way across the country. Mercedes-Benz driving up to Gucci. I mean, this happened in New York, it happened in Santa Monica, it happened in Boston on Newbury Street, it happened on Rodeo Drive. It happened the same way, and the police in Soho, and the police just didn't happen to be there.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence.
The artist, Hal Bromm calls us to say what we artists are doing. What is the artist to do?
Well, sadly, the artist now has to say adios because we're out of time. But I want to thank you both for being here. And Hayley, thanks for being our moderator.
Of course, thank you. Yes, thank you all for joining. This was a very fruitful conversation, and I've been very interested to hear all of your insights. So, thank you.
What's fun for me is it's one that Lucio and I would not have had on our own.
Yeah.
What are we doing? What did you say?
It's one that you and I would not have had on our own.
Yes.
I don't know
We
what
are on the corner.
this is not it. So this is great.